Chapter 17 of The Column of Dust by Evelyn Underhill. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Josh Mitteldorf. Chapter 17, Constance and the Real. It is our own notion of the first and only fair, yet embodied in a substance, yet dissolving again into a sort of imagination. It is beyond me. Newman, Callista. Martin sat by the fire. Once he shivered a little and coughed suddenly, and Constance looked at him with terror. It was an evil night of sleet and icy winds. He had come to her lodging cold, wet, and exhausted, but with that invulnerable radiance of his, untouched by these outward disabilities. The watcher looked at him with sympathy, with envy almost, comprehending the haste and ardour of the escaping spirit, hotfoot for the real. Martin now shone for him with a simple light, the more noticeable amongst the cloudy personalities of the town. He was assured in his possession of something to which this comfortable, wage-earning horde had never attained, something which even Phoebe, lit by her selfless passion, even Constance with her eager peering, could not see. The source of this splendour was not far to seek. The shrine of the cup stood upon the table between them. Its doors were closed. A heavy covering of tooled leather shrouded the jewelled angels and winged animals, and the mystical plates that went about them from an inquisitive world. Even thus disguised, as it were, in travelling dress, it seemed alien as any pilgrim angel amongst the nomads' tents, from the busy, shabby civic life into which it had been thrust. So remote and starry a thing might be actual in the city of Sarras. It was impossibly fantastic in cheap lodgings near Notting Hill. Yet it stood there as it had stood upon its altar, defying the competition of material things whilst meeting them on their own plane, a tangible link between two worlds. The spasmodic thunder of the motor omnibuses on the main road, the rattle of the lighter traffic, the crescendo of the postman as he came, house by house, down the street. These sounds, broken at intervals by those sudden, hateful, inexplicable cries which puncture the London night, had but thrown into a greater relief the deep silence in which the Grails dwelt apart, ringed in by its invulnerable reality. She had exclaimed when Martin stood with it in the doorway, "Oh, not here, not here! There's no place for it in this world." He had answered, "This world is its home." "No, no, the pure earth, the clean country, perhaps, but not this foul city." "This foul city," said Martin, "is many worlds, not one. It lies fold upon fold, and white folds are hidden amongst the rest. And where there is one mind left that can love it, it has a resting place. Can you find such a lover, such a safe guardian here?" It was the watcher who answered this question, crying out in her mind humbly and urgently, casting himself down before the exile of eternity, clamouring for the control of his friend's human forces, that therewith he might serve, even from the deeps of the dream, the idea which he loved. Now they sat, as it were by consent, in silence. Martin's words, the watcher's answer, had loosed activities too urgent to find issue in speech. Constance glanced perpetually from him to her other guest and back again, trying hard to orient her mind amongst these incredible adventures. She knew now the reason of his coming, knew, resented and opposed it with the whole strength of her will. She was beset by emotions, alive with them. Each by turns claimed dominion, announcing itself as the accredited agent of that self which sat shrouded within. They grouped themselves, as it seemed to her, into two camps. The army of human things spread very widely, terrible with the banners of life, and over against it a little company, most strange of aspect, to which as yet she could not give a name. From the camp of humanity, that sad vague longing for the warm touch of common life, for respect, protection, the peaceful domination of a cruder, stronger will, which had tugged so cruelly at her heart in the moment of Phoebe's sudden exhibition of normal and irrational love. It urged on her the joyous necessity of a descent to the sweet and trustful intimacies of the earth, to no fierce appeasement of instinctive passions, but rather to the gentler commerce, the domestic pieties of mutual help. It whispered Vae solis, woe to the lonesome, and glossed this bitter warning with a reminder of the years that she had missed. It suggested to her, as no mean objective, the completing as far as might be, upon this human plane, of a life that was clearly incomplete. She foresaw the careful forging, the consolidation of friendships, of the human social link. She saw Andrew, through the long years, coming to her for the understanding which she could never return, Muriel taking an affection that she would not repay. She conceived of herself giving and spending, a centre of selfless activities, accepting on every hand love, obligation, duty, in the sacred name of life, and of life herself as rewarding the faithful initiate with new and mysterious gifts. She saw also the one blot upon this prospect, Vera, and decided that she too must become the object of a wholesome but not inconvenient interest, material for the builder's hands. All her late adventures had but seemed to endorse the propriety of these emotions, their vast opportunities, the finality of the experience on which they converged. They broke it to her, as it were, that the little things of life were, taken collectively, worth-while for the little animals which life had bred, that the amenities of camp life mean more to the private soldier than the far-off idea for which the war was waged. This powerful attack was met by other forces whose action she would have resisted had she dared. Their battle was set against the claims of individuality, against all the tossing banners of the senses, however cunningly disguised. They came like auxiliaries from oversea, borne on a strong tide, cold and pure, that seemed to have risen in the soundless deeps, and as a great ship coming by canals into the heart of fertile country, where the watery path runs fine between the serviceable mangold fields, will bring landsmen certain tidings of the hidden sea, a hint of far-off adventure lurking in the tarry ropes. So, with the intrusion of this company from unseen immensities, Constance felt upon her face the chill spray of the formless ocean beyond time. She knew but too well whence came these urgent powers. Once she had been shut with them in the chapel of the fells, and they had poured forth upon her, overwhelming her judgment and her will. Then she had fled their arms, though she could not escape their remembrance. They had followed her. They were not to be eluded. They pursued, they caressed, they held torches, from which a new radiance was cast on the army of life, so that its ranks took another proportion, its very standards shone with strange tints. The centre, it seemed, of their influence, its symbol was that enshrined chalice which Martin, leaving the dream, must leave behind. Its coming had brought close to her this terrible yet adorable world. It threatened to impose that world in its unknown obligations upon her mind. She was determined to refuse its presence. She would not permit her life to be deflected by an accidental encounter with a relic whose very meaning she did not understand, whose legend her intelligence refused. Her unrest was accentuated by the watcher's distress, possessed by the vision of an unimaginable beauty, feeling close upon him the very benediction of that idea which he had ignorantly pursued through eternity with such utter unsuccess. He yet clung to the friend whom he loved. With an odd touch of human feeling, he now desired for her the happiness which she had chosen, rather than that tranquillity which his reason would have accorded to her. She was bent clearly on tasting it to the full, this tangle of love and death, this terrible combination of intimate union and utter loneliness. Since she was set upon it, even to his own despite, he would help her, and yet there was the one love, the one will, the beautiful, the adored, the unattained, only to be reached by him now, in so far as he could drag her with him on the way. But she did not wish to go. She would not lend herself to his adventure, and she too, as he dimly discerned it, had her rights. The watcher began to taste something of man's awful choice between his neighbour and his God. When the silence had lasted a little while, Martin said to her, "Suppose you talk to me about it." "It?" she replied. "The problem that is pulling you apart. Air it a little. It is a splendid opportunity, you know, because I am going to die. Confessors, I think, should always be dying men." "Detached," she corrected him. "Am I not?" "You are a lover," she said, "and a fanatic, which is the same thing. You will show no mercy because you are convinced. But I'm not, and I don't wish to be." "Your lodger is." "But there is another side to my life, a real, warm, actual side, and I want to live it. You would think it commonplace, foolish, unworthy, but it's alive. It means that I matter to another human being. It means that one is not alone. I have tried solitude. I can't bear it. And you would drive me back to loneliness for this." "You would not be lonely." "I should. Alone with invisible things, the most terrible solitude of all. And now I am nearly happy. Let me be. I've got a friend, a stupid, ordinary friend who is kind, and another, a foolish woman who's lonely, who I can help. It is something to lean on and something to do, something solid in life. Oh, I know it seems absurdly vague and scrappy. I know that it will go when we are dead. But I want it now, all the same." "Well, why not?" "I don't know," she said, "but I'm afraid. I think that when the white light is poured on it, everything will change. There will be a shifting of values and deepening of shadows, a lighting up of hidden things, and I should not be able to go on. And yet, surely, my little satisfactions are innocent and reasonable on their own plane. May not my heart know what loyalty, gentleness, and gratitude mean? Once I gave my body the privileges of womanhood. That's over. But my life is not over. It goes on, and there are all the subtler senses to be fed, the delicate joys of action and intercourse to be tasted, the savories of the emotional feast. I suppose they seem incomplete and unimportant, but they are important to me. They are small. You would find that a bigger love would answer best." She understood him and exclaimed, "Don't make me take it. I can't. You do not know. I will not have it. I am not worthy." "No one is worthy. Was I?" "I think you must have been, because you love it. But I don't think that I love it, and I know that I don't want it." "You don't know that. You can't, because you don't know it," he said. "And you never will know it until you care a bit. It's worth your while, too, just for the beauty, the intense, the incredible romance. Why, the discovery of it, and you've got to discover, you know, to do your own hunting from the first, is the most splendid, the most thrilling, the greatest adventure in the whole world. It's the one love affair that never wears out. It's ecstasy on ecstasy, the world remade for you. Fiat lux, fresh every morning, and new things gleaming in the ray. How dull not to have it in your universe. The dream and the discipline, the everlasting rapture, and the never-ending quest." She caught for an instant his excitement, trembled under it. She had a glimpse, as he spoke, of that high romance, that splendid passion. Martin's phrases played upon her nerves as music might. She blushed and breathed quicker, because They were beautiful and exalted her. She heard behind them the wild, solemn, and exultant song with which the ages move to their destiny beneath the hand of love. Then the walls of the room ran back into perspective and caught her as in a vice. The piercing music faded, the sullen noises of reality returned. She said to herself, "Don't be a fool." And to Martin, "No, it's no good. I dare not. It is too overwhelming. Against my will, against my belief, it crushes me." "It is," said Martin, "very inconvenient. And that is what you really mean. You are afraid of it, afraid of being deflected, of hitching your wagon to a star and being dragged perforce up stony hills. Don't be a coward." "I am not. But I can't react to this." "That inhabitant of yours can, will. It is his chance. Do you owe him no duty?" "That's dreadful, too. Here he is, too strong for me. He is pushing, eager, he divines things ahead of me, and I am confused, in clouds. Won't you help me out? Tell me, explain." "Enter the atmosphere of reality. You will get your explanations there. That is all I ask you to do, and all that he asks. You are stifling him with your frittered emotions, your little inconsequent loves and hates. Get into the clearer air, the purer light, and from there love life as much as you will." "That is impossible," she said. "This is a strong thing, a terrible thing, pulling. But the other, the thing I really want, is pulling back. They are both life, I suppose. They should both be part of it. But they can't be for me. I am sure of that." "Best not to be quite so sure," answered Martin, "and to trust life a little when you cannot see your way. There is a cosmic economy, you know, as well as a political one. The angels have their reserves. Here is your opportunity, a unique one, a very mighty thing. Take your talisman. Live from that center. Love from it. Throw down the barriers. Merge yourself in this. Don't quarrel with it because you do not see how it is going to fit. The wind that bloweth where it listeth never fits in. As well quarrel with that, because you do not see how you are going to extract from it the oxygen that you need. You can't get it in any other way, you know, and you can't get the real except in its rare perpetration of the dream. Et verbum caro factum est, et habitavit in nobis. And the word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And we said, how very inconvenient, how disturbing, how hopelessly incompatible with practical life. "Well, it is," she said obstinately. "It makes a cleavage. You cannot blend it with the rest." "Not a cleavage. It is plated right through, the very essence, the actualization of life." "But earth's got to be in it, in human life, I think. That's the whole point, the miracle of the link, the only place where earth is sanctified and safe." "And how," she asked, "is your link to be kept safe in the flux and tangle of the dream? How, when we come to the concrete, am I to preserve your relic of reality here as it should be kept? Where is the altar, the solitude, the adoration?" "I am glad you put that one essential last. As for the rest, they matter nothing. It pleased me whilst I could to make things orderly and appropriate, to evoke again the atmosphere of the age that had loved it best. But of course the whole world, more than the world, all being, is just a sanctuary for this." His eyes were upon the shrine. They seemed to look through and beyond it into the very eyes of the beloved, as if he had already begun to make his farewell to the dear visible sign of his joy, and passed in imagination to the secret moment of rapture, the extinguished torch, the silent embrace. Presently he said in a meditative voice, considering as it were from far off her curious case, "How odd it must seem to the angels! There you are, you, the clean and glorious soul of you, imprisoned, fettered, peeping out, and you, who might break the fetters, might escape to the sunshine, the splendour, the dalliance for which you were made, are held back because you have persuaded yourself that your fetters are delightful, educative, even necessary toys. "Ah," she exclaimed, "the pretty words! They make me restless. They remind me of the bars. But if I am imprisoned, it's in a strong and cunning fortress. How can one slip the fetters? How can one escape? If you're honest, you will know when the hour strikes for it. Each goes out by his own gate. It is always just wide enough to let one through. Impossible to prophesy anything more than that. Yield yourself to love. Don't shirk it, that is all. You are on the very verge of waking, you know. You have fear and amazement, and that is the initiatory touch, the peep through the bars. But awe is for those who only look upon the mysteries. There is a rapture within and satisfaction of every desire, a place of refreshment, of light, and of peace." The watcher cried in her heart, torn between this fierce, all-satisfying love, the appeasement of his torments, the end of knowledge, the unknown object of his quest, and the troubled, dim-eyed woman bent still on feeling her way by the touch of material things along that pathway to reality which he discerned, straight and shining, before him. Martin rose. "Well, you have got to do it," he said. "You found the cup, and you recognized it, you and your lodger. You are the only efficient guardian, merely because, in spite of yourself, you know. But can you trust me with it? Anything might happen." It was her last unavailing wriggle under his hand. "Yes, and if it does, it is all right." "Don't you want to tell me what to do?" "No. Why should I know best? I have finished my trust. I hand it on. Now it is yours. You hold the key. Not for me to dictate." As he was leaving her, she ran before him, barred the door. "I am afraid," she said, "to be alone with it. Oh, how wise the people were who invented rites and priesthoods to shelter them a little and stand between. I cannot endure the light, the power. Shut in the room with it, day after day, alone with the real. It is too strong. I dare not." "The rites and the priests," he answered, "are no good once one cares. Then no shelter avails." "I fear it." So gentle, he said, and so passionate, his feet amongst the lilies, his head girded with the thorn, humble yet omnipotent, desirous and elusive, the most intimate of mysteries, the most mysterious of intimates, a servant of his servants, drinking with them the loving cup of pain, transcendent personality, self-limited to the small powers of your soul. "Is it this that you fear?" The watcher cried, "No, it is this that I seek, that I love." She put her hands over her eyes, then, desperately, as if she feared to share his piercing vision, would draw across his only windows the heavy curtain of the flesh. That by this action she blinded herself also did not weigh with her. She was at a moment in which too great a darkness seemed less terrible than an excess of light. The blessed dimness shut her in, soothed her. It lulled for an instant the torments of her unavailing thought. Only Martin's last words echoed, phrase by phrase, in her empty heart. Each sentence struck sharp and clear, leaving a little hammer mark upon the soul. She trembled, sick with apprehension of that which she could not see, but she was faintly conscious of strong and tender hands, as it were, that held her, and of her own helplessness within them, a weakness that was peace. The meshes of the will were close about her. She divined them. They were plaited into the amazing patterns which she could not understand. They clasped her crumbling body firmly, linking it with the furthest fringe of things. The darkness thickened, and the silence Far away, as in a dream, she heard the sound of a soft closing door. Then within her mind she felt the gentle movement of the watcher. He said, "Dear child, poor little one, have no fear. Do not resist. I am your friend. I desire your happiness. But without the idea, happiness is impossible in a world that contains both love and death." She stayed yet a little longer in the darkness, hesitating on the verge of the new life. When she looked up, she was alone with the Grail. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of The Column of Dust by Evelyn Underhill. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Josh Mitteldorf. Chapter 18. The Mistresss of Novices. O rash one, pause and learn my name. I know not love, nor hate, nor ruth. I am that heart of frost or flame, which burns with one desire, the truth. Thou shalt indeed be lifted up on wings like mine twixt sea and sky, but canst thou drink with me my cup, and canst thou be baptized as I? The cup I drink can only rouse the thirst it slakes not, like the sea, and lo, my own baptismal brows must be their own Gethsemane. W. H. Mallock, The Veil of the Temple. During the ensuing days, Constance perceived with astonishment the unchanged demeanour of visible things. Like most neophytes of the mysteries, she had vaguely expected them to react to the incredible conditions in which, with her, they were now placed. For the second time in her experience, the walls of the world had been broken. Once they had given way before the assault of a supersensual curiosity. Now they were dissolved by the presence of a relic, a symbol, wherein unimaginably personality and idea were brought to a point, and pierced as a flaming sword the barriers of time and space. A terrible and starry perfection dwelt with her now. Yet such was the stubborn quality of the dream that the shabby room, the shabby daily life, were much as usual. The long exhausting hours of work, the cheap and hasty lunch, 2 poached eggs and a penny roll, eaten amidst the perennial crumbs and cocoa stains of a thriving tea-shop, the homeward tramp through the sodden streets, the grate which smoked persistently since the northerly winds had set in, the pile of mending with which she could never keep up. All these things were still there in the forefront of her consciousness. The strange light which shone in her home did not alter their values. They appeared insensible to its rays. Even Vera, as recalcitrant to spiritual forces as the least animate of things, seemed unaware of any change in her environment. The snowy season had added a chronic cold in the head to her usual disabilities, and she took full advantage of this weakness in pressing her claims upon attention and indulgence. She spoke greedily and persistently of Christmas, and mentioned the exact profit in food and toys which the landlady's children usually extracted from this celebration of holy poverty. "I've used 5 hankies to-day, as well as all the times I did without, and hundreds of sniffling. Billy had a little gun last Christmas, one you can hurt with when it shoots. Tante, can't I have a little gun?" "What would you do with it?" "Hit things. Billy hit a puppy, and it bled." "That was cruel." "Don't care," said Vera. "I want to hit things, and cats and sparrows. Do let me have a gun, and try to shoot." "We will see." "Oh, I know about seeing," cried Vera stormily. "The toys you see about are the ones that never come." "I want to shoot. I want to hit things like a boy. Say I'll have a gun, or else I'll suck paint off my soldiers and be sick when you isn't here." "Santa Claus," said Constance with authority, "brings whatever he likes. People have to take what they get and say thank you, else he does not come at all another year." Vera muttered rebelliously, "Billy says there ain't no Santa Claus." Nevertheless, she was half convinced, and retreated. The watcher, contemplating the scene, said, "Strange. Yet I suppose that this also has its place in the idea." Constance exclaimed, "Yes, but where? But how? Where is the beauty, the love, and the law? I want a link, a guide," he answered. "Is it not here?" It was, but because she could not apprehend it, it exasperated her. She stood, as it seemed, outside the true field of its power, perceiving the light, dazed by it indeed, but untouched by those chemical rays whose fringe reached the watcher, were received by him with so humble a thankfulness. He said to her with disappointment, "I had thought that it would have made you very happy, that the real might have solved the discords of the dream. But since it does not, I think you had best leave it alone." From the depths of her spirit another voice replied, "I cannot." "Far better," he said. "It is not for you. It does not belong to your world. I see that now. I had forgotten it. The stir and effervescence of this life are against an understanding of its quietness. You must wait for the settlement of death. It belongs to us, it calls us, it awaits our knowledge. You cannot cope with it from the midst of the dream." The inner voice answered, "If we cannot, why is it here?" "Some of you may. To do so you must leave all else, I think, and go away, as Martin did, into a secret place where there can be no scattering of your love. But you hate solitude, and this is a solitary's affair. So leave it alone until you die. Turn to the life that you wished for which your body was built. That is best. Try your own recipe. Be happy with the other little creatures. I wish you to be happy. In this, too, there may be some secret elixir, some syrup of truth. I will help you. You shall forge links and join with the others, as that man and woman did who looked at each other with so quiet and strange a joy. We will put the difficulties away. I see them where you cannot. I am determined to undertake your life." She listened to him with astonishment, for he seemed at this moment almost human. He had moved far from his old attitude of arrogance, impatience, curiosity. He spoke as some generous parent, some indulgent friend might speak to a weaker comrade, to a dear and petted child, forbidding, for very kindness' sake, the austere and honourable quest, and offering in its place the pleasant valleys, with all that they held of homely, dulcet life. He was for the hills. He longed for them, and she knew it, but because of his friendship he would forego them yet a little. He was on her side in this, for her immediate happiness, for all the human cares and pleasures that she loved. It was the irony of the situation that this eagerness, this sympathy in him, provoked in Constance's mind no gratitude, but rather a stubborn opposition, an unwilling opposition which, though it hurt her, she could not suppress. It was forced on her by that inner inhabitant of hers, the tiresome, unaccommodating thing whose waking moments she had learned to dread. In the presence of the cup, this dweller of the innermost kept, as it seemed, incessant vigil. It too loved, reverenced life, fertile, strenuous life, but loved it as a pilgrim loves the highway, not as an animal desires its lair. Where she, with the watcher's approval, would have lingered, it was for a forward march. Whither? It could not tell her, could only cry, "On! On!" Where the watcher now said, "Rest, enjoy, be passive, do not seek to understand." "No use," she said to him then, "to try to understand it. I cannot. But I feel the pressure none the less. Is not your normal chance of pain, love, death, and loneliness enough for you?" he answered. "Must you share our torment too? I can never rest until I know the idea in its fullness, because it is my end. I have but a forced option, to suffer or to understand. I think that is what you mean by heaven and hell. But why add this burden to your own, poor blinded little prisoner of the dust?" "Prisoner within the dream," said the imperious voice again. "But when the dream is over, what?" "Time enough for that," observed the watcher. "Here you are conditioned by it. It is the will. Since you cannot annihilate your selfhood, it is best to accept its limitations. Live, run to and fro, enjoy your toys." The urgent voice replied, "Too late. I have been set upon the road. I will help you to turn back." "Once," said the voice, "you were for my liberation. You saw its possibility and urged on me its joy. You mocked at her blindness, condemned her transitory toys." "I did not love her then." "'Tis a short-sighted love." "You taught it," said the watcher. Tossed between these combatants, Constance found but little enjoyment in the position in which she was placed. Whilst they fought, the cup reigned in its silence, and she recognized in it the true arbiter of her fate. She had taken it grudgingly, determined, if she might, to defend herself against its assault. Now there began to happen to her one of the most disconcerting of all experiences, the steady pressure of an influence which is purer than oneself. Soon she realized that it is vain to desire to sit in darkness, once one has assumed the guardianship of a great light. That light pierced the doors which hid its material symbol. It grew unawares upon her consciousness. She began to understand something of the mood of those old mystics who imagined in the flaming chalice the utmost secret of their love. The interests, the values of temporal life slid from her as she gazed at it, so softly that she knew not they had gone. Her will, her vision, were chained upon this point where she looked on the eternal self-renewing of that creative agony which is the only fruitfulness. From its midst, as from the midst of a furnace, a voice cried to its mate, and there was that within her which answered the call. Through the window of the Grail, through the sad colours, the cloudy, faulty glass, she now gazed upon that ocean of reality, that soundless sea whose waves had teased and buffeted her blinded soul. She was gathered to a contemplation of that still activity. She felt the searching tide of that inexorable yet compassionate love. She was of it, and within it, saw in the mental light that bathed it the tiny and various flotilla of life, as it moved upon the quiet bosom of eternity, the very foundations of its being submerged and supported in these mighty and unsuspected deeps. All the pageant of creation was shown to her then, as in a picture, the beautiful, the cruel, the sublime, the obscene. She saw the plants in their still and lovely acts of worship, the vivid marvels of dappled beasts and glancing birds, soft fur and sharp talons, clash and encounter, hatred and joy. Life bred them, cast them forth, and claimed their dust. She saw the teeming poor, maimed bodies, stifled spirits, blinded eyes, patiently, stubbornly, starving and breeding, the cross-bearers of the race. She saw their rare brethren, the toilers of the spirit, enduring all anguish that they might give birth to an idea. She saw the wise and the foolish, the dreamer and the worker, the creedless and the credulous, critic, fanatic, artist, those who went log over taffrail and sextant in hand, and those who voyaged without reckoning, sailing because they must. She saw also the crowded, aimless vessels behind them, drifting inert before the kindly breeze. Seen thus, the thing had an amazing aspect of simplicity, an air amidst all its fussiness, the trimming of canvas, the eccentricities of the helm, of moving towards one inevitable end. One wind filled all the sails, though each wide swinging compass might give it a different name. To be faithful to their chosen course was plainly the one duty of these navigators, to steer by their sealed instructions, each one of them, however bizarre the evolutions which those secret papers might ordain. In the terror, wonder, and majesty of that voyage, each sailing spirit on exploration bent, yet homeward bound, courage was seen as the supreme virtue of the seaman. The demands of the individual, the mean and peevish cry for pleasure, self-expression, for smooth waters favouring tides, sank to nothingness. She looked deeper, considering her own life, her own path upon that sea. She studied it dispassionately, glancing backwards, as it were, upon her wake. She saw it began with daring and high courage, the setting forth upon the crest of an erratic wave which had carried her far into the deep. Then she saw the long and solitary days in the rough waters, the constant effort, the monotony, the fatigue, and then the twisted course which she had tried to snatch at a chance of smoother going, when she had disguised her flag that she might range with companionships and leave her isolated voyage. In the cold pure light of the cup, in the great vision of the measureless spaces, these natural and human actions, these concealments, adjustments, little tackings to and fro in search of consorts, comforts, change, suddenly took on an unendurable aspect of meanness. To choose your course and forsake it, she saw this as the unforgivable sin. She had called life her goddess. She had dared to take rank as a worshipper at that shrine. Yet her behaviour toward life had been against all the canons of divine courtesy. Honesty, says Richard Rolle, is Mistresss of the Novices. It was honesty who now stood before this postulant, and her scourge was in her hand. She said to herself, "I knew when I took it that something would happen, but this, that I should have to pay now, so cruelly, so late." "What now?" said the watcher. "Are you not satisfied yet?" "No, I can't go on being comfortable and dishonest. It shames me. I have got to go straight." "Straight?" "No concealments. Tell the past." "Well, what then? Is that also a grief?" "It is hell. It's final. It cuts me off." "Then don't do it." "I must," she exclaimed. "It's my way, my path. I have got to go on. I can't bear this accusing light. It is too pure, too cold. But it burns me." "But how strange an idea," he said, "that you should mind showing the other little creatures the actions of your past, mere things that you have done, impulses of the mind and movements of the body. These surely have no importance, once they are complete. Yesterday's dinner is digested now. It does not count any more. It reveals the taste that chose it, I suppose, and I am different because I ate it. My make-up is changed." "But people know you, see you," said the watcher. "Does a description of the processes that you have passed through alter that result?" She answered sadly, "It does, for some of them, and that is why one has to tell." "But these actions of the past, these things that made you, they are in the idea, they are aspects of the real, so why fear to reveal them? At the utmost you do but reveal the making of your soul." "I don't wish to reveal it." "Then do as you wish. Keep silence and be happy." "No, I must not." "You shall." He opposed her, flung against her determination his strange and lawless will. She fought under it, with a sense of wild triumph in thus meeting him, setting at last the purest flame of her humanity, its justice, dignity, and truth, against the contemptuous love which counted these things as nothing if by chance they jeopardized her present ease. She was going to give up that ease, to give up everything in existence that she cared for. She was in the act of expelling from her life all friendship, dainty pleasure, social joy, the one way of escape from the hateful sordid round. In this exalted moment she was glad. Nothing counted now, nothing at all, against the supreme necessity of orienting herself to that cold, adorable, and all-compelling light. The watcher said to her, "How strong you are today, and how foolish! Why should you wreck your little peace for that which you can neither see nor know?" It was the obstinate dweller of the innermost who answered, "Blind obedience is as much my business as loving vision is yours." "I cannot understand you," he said again, "nor the meaning of this thing which you would do. Time is a dream, and your passage through it is illusion. All that exists is you within your now. Where then is the importance of your past? One may have done things in it that the world thinks wrong." "Wrong? What is wrong?" said the watcher. She turned from him to the shrine again, as if she would extort from it some consolation, a promise that should carry her through the bitter waters toward which she was set. But the light for her was cold, inexorable. It called her on, but only that she might share an inheritance of pain, as the Red Cross called the Crusader to the plague-stricken ship, the parched desert, shipwreck, misery, and thirst, but gave no certain promise of the holy city at the end. When she was out in the street and the door was shut on her, when she waited for the blue and orange omnibus which went once in 10 minutes to the corner of the terrace in which the Vinces lived, there came on her the natural revolt against a destiny which seemed so determined to wreck her temporal content, whilst offering no eternal compensation. It was Sunday afternoon. The streets seemed stagnant. A respectable ennui brooded about the shuttered shops. It was that awful hour in which the city ceases her courtship of visible things, to discover that she knows no fairer love to take their place. Constance felt herself to be doomed, just such a condition, to a perpetual wandering, in silence broken only by the muffin bell, down grey and muddy roads, between blank walls and prosperous houses which sheltered happy people from the world. She did not want to do it. It was forced on her, as Sunday is forced on an unwilling population in the interest of an ideal which she could not accept. She reviewed the situation, looking for some mitigating circumstance, some opportunity of an honourable compromise with fate. She began to reassure herself, remembering Muriel's liberal point of view, that openness of mind which was ready to receive all things, even at the cost of retaining none. Her insistence on the true dignity of womanhood, the importance of individual concepts of life. Muriel, who loathed conventional standards of morality, would feel bound to pretend a certain sympathy, or at least to say that she understood. All then might be well. Courage and honesty vindicated, at a trifling cost. These considerations upheld her during the journey, and she rang the bell with alacrity, almost with cheerfulness, when she arrived. Muriel received her graciously. She was alone, and sat as usual upon the floor by the white-tiled hearth where a small wood-fire was burning. Her slight and charming figure composed well against the Persian rugs, the pale, unbroken surface of the wall. Her wheat-coloured hair shone and flickered as if it were infected by the spirit of the flames. Constance, big and solid, heavily and plainly dressed, determined upon a hateful sincerity, depressed and very tired, was conscious of the absurdity of her encounter with this dear and pretty thing, this adorable butterfly which she was about to place upon the judgment seat. "I am so glad," said Muriel as she entered, "that you came in this afternoon. You have saved me from writing you a note, and in the stress of this terrible season one is always grateful for that. Is not the tyranny of Christmas one of the least desirable legacies bequeathed to us by our ancestors over beliefs?" Constance, obsessed by her horrible errand, full of fear now that the moment was so nearly come, longed only for immediate opportunity of speech. She also wished to kiss Muriel before it was forever too late. Instead, she sat down and replied vaguely and calmly, "It is a busy time." One does not regret the expenditure of energy, for energy is always beautiful in some way. One feels that. And the celebration of a birth, a fatherless birth, seen in the light of our modern concepts, it might well be the typical feast of womanhood. "Yes," said Constance eagerly. "Yes, it might. I'm so glad you think that. I felt sure." "But the acquisitive faculty of man has seized on it," continued Muriel, "and there its poison lies. It has become a festival of greed, of our most materialistic instincts. Our intellect may revolt, but tradition addresses itself to the subliminal mind, and there meets a too willing response. Is it not degrading? Do you know that I, yes, even I, have felt forced to send away 6 hampers and several dozen picture postcards this year?" Constance refused to be deflected. "I wanted to see you if I could before Christmas came," she said, "to tell you something that I—" Muriel interrupted again. "I hoped that perhaps you would come to us for Christmas," she observed, "unless you are engaged to other friends. In fact, I was going to write to you tonight. I haven't mentioned it to Andrew yet, but I know that he will be pleased too. He was telling me that you lived in a furnished room, and I felt sure you would find a certain difficulty in getting your meals at such a time. Here we shall of course make no changes in our menu. I could not stoop to that. I should not wish Felix to associate ethical ideas with alterations in his diet. And there is no reason why this digestion should be upset because he is celebrating under an allegory the emergence of his spiritual powers into conscious life. You must only expect our usual simple fare, but better a dinner of herbs than a drunken landlady after all." "It's very kind," said Constance, rather breathlessly, "but I'm afraid I could not come. You see, there's Vera." "Of course, that was one reason why I invited you. The children will amuse one another, and besides, I am anxious to see her. An adopted child is always an interesting experiment. One obtains the results of pure theory, unthwarted by that terrible parental instinct which seems to militate against all educational reform." Constance answered, "I cannot bring her to this house. It is unthinkable. Once I intended that you should never know of her existence even. I wished to divide my life, to keep her apart. But now I feel, before we go any further, I should like you to understand, to know the truth. Vera is not an adopted child. She is my daughter. I came here today determined to tell you that." "Oh, do you mean, have you been married?" "No." Muriel looked at her, first with great surprise, and then, to her own intense annoyance, with an uncontrollable horror. In her attitude toward both sin and religion she had always exhibited that breadth of mind which is the prerogative of well-read and experience. Now she remembered, for the first time after 10 years of this intellectual freedom, that her father had been an archdeacon of the established church. Memory, in its most sardonic mood, reminded her of much that she had said in the interval concerning the pure nature of maternity and the unimportance of the sexual tie. But this did not mitigate the dreadfulness of a visitor, worse, an intimate, who confessed to the possession of an illegitimate child. Constance went on speaking. She seemed to be talking about it, explaining her point of view, but unconventional opinions on such a subject are only decent in those who have never put them into practice. Muriel did not listen. She was thinking hard, trying to square her natural feelings of propriety with her official theories of life. They refused to adjust themselves, those violent and irrational prejudices which she recognized as arising from the subliminal mind, as representing with a painful accuracy the Victorian ancestors whom she despised, took charge of her consciousness. They said very plainly that it was impossible for Mrs. Vince to continue Miss Tyrrel's acquaintance. Presently, without looking at her visitor, she stretched her hand towards the bell. Constance got up and went away. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of The Column of Dust by Evelyn Underhill. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Josh Mitteldorf. Chapter 19, Constance, Andrew, and the Truth. Truth, I cried, though the heavens crush me for following her, no falsehood, though a whole celestial lubberland were the price of apostasy. Carlyle, Sartor Resartus. In the evening, Andrew came to her. She looked at him as he entered, surprised that he should so quickly have undertaken this embarrassing visit of farewell. She said to him at once, "Muriel has told you, I suppose?" Yes, she told me at dinner-time," replied Andrew. "At dessert. So I thought I'd just come round to say I'm so awfully sorry it's happened, don't you know? You must have had a beastly 10 minutes of it. No notion that you meant to confide in her in that way. Very fine of you, of course, very straight, one admires it, but a girl like Muriel, all notions and no knowledge, so to speak, well, one hardly expects her to take a tolerant view of these things. I thought, I hoped perhaps as she was so unconventional. Well, yes, that's just where it is, said Andrew. Just where people are apt to make a mistake. She talks like that, but at the bottom she is the usual thing. Wish now that I had warned you. I never thought of it. Really, as a matter of fact, she's just wrapped up in the boy. An intelligent mother, that's her idea, and that is all she means, though, mind you, she doesn't know it when she talks about women and the race. Contrives somehow to forget the rest. In theory, she thinks it doesn't matter because she has always lived in a comfortable, married sort of world. But when the thing is forced on her notice, and not quite in order, well, don't you know? He became red and embarrassed. Yes, I see it now, but I had to tell her. Oh, quite realize your feeling, Christmas and all that. Still, it's a pity. But you are not shocked. Her wreck, it seemed, was not the total loss that she had feared. Well, said Andrew, in a way, if you'll forgive my saying so, one guessed, don't you know? Little niece and so on, so papa. Quite a natural idea, mind you, and in my opinion quite a justifiable deception. So much better for the child if you can keep it up. But shocked, that's hardly a man's feeling. Very sorry, for your sake, of course. Hate to think of it. Can't bear to see a woman badly treated and left in the lurch. Like cruelty to animals. Makes one sick. It's a beastly shame the way some cads behave, and one has no hold over them, worse luck. Poor girl. Poor Constance. She said very quickly, Don't pity me. I was not badly treated. But he thrust the subject on one side. There was determination as well as delicacy in the action. Constance perceived that could she but rest at this point, she might preserve not only his friendship, but that more precious asset, his respect. Nevertheless, she insisted, Please, make no mistake, it was my own fault. I did it. Girls get infatuated, said Andrew, and then they lose their heads, ignorant of the world, very properly so, of course. They don't know what's before 'em, by Jove. I often wonder that more of them don't get into a mess. I was not infatuated. Eh? He was astonished. It was altogether different from that, and I am going to make you see it. I won't keep you with half-confessions, foster pathetic illusions, let you be kind to me. This is not a confession either, for there's nothing in it of which I am ashamed. You shall understand, and then you can sympathize or leave me, as you please. He expostulated. Only gives you pain, raking it all up like this, and makes no difference, really. These things, old stories between friends, far better to leave 'em alone. Between friends, she said, there has already been too much concealment. And it isn't an old story, it is I, myself. Not your real self, replied Andrew soothingly. My realest self, my real, hungry, active self that longed to live. Don't you know, can't you imagine what it is to have powers and ache to use them, to sit idle and vacant, and see your chances of legitimate satisfaction of life grow hourly less? Listen, I come of middle-class intellectuals, of the sterile class, I with this body. She stood up before him, deep-bosomed, the perfect maternal type, and he thought of Muriel, eager, nervous, narrow-hipped. When I was 27, she said, I could read in 6 languages, and yet I hadn't lived. I wanted life. I was proficient in the higher mathematics, but I knew nothing. I wanted to know. Can't you realize the fate of such women as I am? Whole, sound women, perfectly matured creatures, penned, cooped up, wasted. Yes, it's rough luck, said Andrew, slowly, when girls don't get their chance. A wholesome woman wants a husband. The words were kindly meant. He was all for excusing her, but they disclosed instantly the ground upon which she faced him, that foundation of mutual contempt on which the relation of the sexes is raised. They lit antagonisms. He ceased to be Andrew, the friend whom she would enlighten, comfort, and keep. He became man, who dared judge the vital womanhood which life had placed at his mercy, and who should now, she was determined, hear her case. Something took charge, spoke. Constance, amazed, saw her life unroll before her as she defended it, and suddenly perceived a nobility where once she had only supposed a mistake. And if no man needs us, she said, what would you have us do? Read French novels? Had I not a right, the right of all living tissue, the right of all conscious flesh, to dip myself into life, deep in, to touch the ground, stir the muddy depths if I chose? I did it, and paid for it. I don't regret it. Love? This has nothing to do with love. I had machinery at my disposal, the powers of an expert, creative powers. I chose to use them, and there's the result. She held up the washed and faded frock that she had been patching. Nothing very grand, was it? She said. I know that. Don't blame me. Blame the accursed and artificial world. What man of my own class, what being on the upward grade would have done that which I asked? Would you? No. You would have talked about chivalry and left me to find a navvy to father my child. Anyhow, I made her, and it's the soundest, solidest, humanest bit of work that I ever did. I'm justified now. My body is ready for death because I have handed on the torch. It hurt, too, and so I was sure that it was right. She shall be saved in childbearing. Paul knew something when he said that. She stopped, rather breathless. She wondered what had driven her to this astounding candor. Andrew was gazing at her, trying plainly to extract some endurable meaning from her words. His first sympathy was crossed by a crescent anxiety. When she paused, he said to her, Why in God's name didn't you marry the man? I suppose he wanted to marry you? No. She was herself again. More blackguard he. What was he? I don't know, said Constance slowly. I never knew his name. Never knew his name? Great heavens! Is that unforgivable? But How could you?" "Oh, because I longed for life," she said, "for something actual and aboriginal, something that one could not alter by thinking about it. I was sick of thin theories and diluted dreams. I had been book-fed too long. I wanted to get down to the processes of creation, to take my turn." He said again, miserably, "How could you do it?" "I could, just because I had to, because the pressure of life was too great. First I was inquisitive, and then I was on fire. I don't know why, I don't know what happened. On one side it still seems beautiful, though the lining was hideous enough. I wanted the great spaces of the world. I saw them there, stretched out, waiting. I went toward them and found the dust heap." Andrew writhed. "Why," he said, "why have you got to tell me all this?" "I don't know. It's a sort of honesty, I think. You represent the human side. You are it. I must explain to them, clear it up, before I go on." He resented the necessity, thought her selfish. Curious how women loved the confessional. Poor devil of priests, he pitied them. But he was in for it now. He braced himself, and she went on. "The father of my child was a man, just that. I don't know any more. I went down into the crowd because I wanted the intense, uncivilized thing, but he threw open the gates of life, and I saw the workings of it for a moment. I entered into that part of my inheritance. Anyhow, I didn't know then about the other part." "What other part?" said Andrew, in a dull, uninterested voice. "The thing behind. The real." "This seems to be real enough, God knows." Amazement and chivalry, compassion and disgust fought in his slow mind. He was deeply unhappy. The loss of an ideal is a serious matter for practical men. He still wished to be very kind, very friendly. One does not turn on a woman when she has confessed to incredible, even to horrible acts. The past, after all, was past, but he did not look at Constance as he spoke. She saw it. She saw his wretchedness. She came up to him, put her hands on his shoulders, her first familiarity of touch. It was a dominant action, and coming at this moment he found it both astonishing and unfair. "Oh yes," she said, "I am going to touch you, with my body at least. That is different, and if you understand it, you would leave off being disgusted and grieved. I know you think me soiled, tainted, little better than—" He stopped her and denied it, too clumsily. "Oh yes, you do," she said. "Poor Andrew, how little you understand it all. About as much, I suppose, as a breeder of white rabbits understands the evolution of the cherubim. One has got to work out one's own way, you know, and life, mere physical life, is the raw material of that, nothing more." "But need you have done this?" "What else?" she asked. What else was I to do?" Vince answered almost sharply, "I don't see that. Don't see that at all. Nowadays there are so many opportunities for educated women, useful careers open to them, and so on. Very different from what it was in my poor old father's time. Then there was some excuse. I don't say you need have sat at home doing fancy work all day. Single women do a lot of good." "Oh, a lot," she said bitterly. "Paint and scribble and cosset the imperfect. Games to distract their attention and make them forget. But I know what I'm for, what life is for. I'm ready. I am here. Look straight at the big thing, the movement of it, the living, teeming world. Is not the gift of life great and holy? What else counts? And isn't this potting question of our individual rights in poor and mean? What do I care who my child's father may be? What does he do in it? Starts the machinery which ends in birth? His part is over then, and I'm left in charge of the race. Rights of woman? Haven't we got them? Do we not stand side by side with God and share the very pangs of creation?" "Oh, it's all very well talking like this," he answered, "claiming your rights and the law of nature and all that. I've read these notions in books, though I never met anyone who acted on them in this sort of way before. But there's more than you in it. There's the poor little kid. One thinks a bit of her, don't you know? No name and so on. No getting over these things. It's bound to crop up later on." "Yes," she said gravely, "I know it. I owe her a great debt. Vera, the price of truth. Oh, I counted the cost. I had no illusions. But even at that price, I would know." As she spoke, she remembered another voice, which had once cried in her mind, "I will know," and recognized a fellow victim of indomitable curiosity. "And even then, with that, you still think it was, well, a right sort of thing to do?" "Sure it was, from the place where I was then," she insisted. "And that's the point. You see, I only knew that edge of reality, and I had to live up to my vision. I lived the whole of my animal life, fulfilled that part of my duty. That's all. To eat and not to reproduce, to take life but not give it. Is that fair? Where I did go wrong was in not walking straight on from that point, not accepting my portion, giving myself up to my job. I didn't care enough. I don't now, and so I tried to be happy instead of thorough. I looked on the path that I had picked for myself as dreary. It was. But that did not matter, of course, and then, quite slowly, I left off being honest, attending to my responsibilities. You came, and Muriel, and the rest. I was lonely, and I wanted you all so much, but the honest thing, the big fact of my life, was Vera." "Just so," said Andrew, cheering up a little. "But big facts are poor company. Living alone, supporting an illegitimate child, that is what my big fact meant in the concrete, nothing more. Women need little things as well. Do you remember the evening at the play where you were so kind and deferential and gave me sweets? I couldn't bear it that night, going back to the squalid solitude that I had made. It was then I determined that I would keep you somehow, you and Muriel and the others. I loved Muriel. I wanted her. Oh, far more than I have ever wanted you. I could not forgo her, the pleasure of her presence, her refinement, and the pretty life to dip into now and then. So I took advantage of your ignorance, kept quiet. I knew that the child would divide us once I let her, that she would grow up like a barrier to shut me from friendship and joy." "Yes," said Andrew, "they do somehow. Odd thing, if you think it. First Muriel and I, and Felix coming between us. Now you and I, and this little kid. We always seem to split upon the child. It's always the key of the situation. I could have stood all Muriel's rot, indulged it, liked it, laughed at it, if I hadn't seen it being worked out on the boy. And you, this affair of yours, she pays the price, really, don't you know? She represents it, always before one, impossible to forget." Constance replied, "Truths have to become incarnate before they count, at least for solid folks like you and me." He had been speaking to her with a touch of the old confidence, but he caught the note of cleverness in her answer and remembered that in their new relation it was clearly out of place. "Oh, come, my dear little girl," he said kindly. His tone was too kind, an intimation that the angel had come to earth, to muddy earth, and might be treated without ceremony by those who still choose to handle her. She said, "Well, that is it. It was good of you to come. Now you had better go home." "It's quite early." "No matter." She stood up before him, plainly intending his dismissal. He rose and took his hat. "When shall I see you again?" he asked easily. "You won't." "Now, why on earth not?" said Andrew. "Don't be foolish. I rather fancied you might try something of this kind. You mustn't imagine that that it makes any difference between us. Muriel, well, that goes without saying. Can't expect a woman to take a broad line in these things, above all with her female friends. There's the boy to think of. But you and I are old enough to take care of ourselves, aren't we? Yes, she answered, we are, and to know what we want. I wanted two things, your respect and my own. I couldn't have both, it seems. He reassured her. You're mistaken, quite. Afraid I might have spoken hastily. One was surprised just at first, don't you know? You mustn't take any notice. I know, she said. You're very sorry for me, and you're going to be horribly charitable about it. And never mind me of the past. You will condescend to come to my home, though I may not enter yours. And you think that is worth while? Why, a curate could do as much. Go! Do you hear? I won't have you. I can bear solitude, yes, and remembering, too, but no more compromise. I've been left alive for a bit, all these years, and I never knew how dead I was. She stopped and laughed at him. Oh, and if only you knew why I did it, she said, why I told you, had to be honest. If you knew the rest of the tale, how mad, how wildly mad you'd think me. Andrew replied, Well, you are a bit cranky today. If I don't see any objection in coming, why the devil should you mind if I come? My affections have still their independence. They shan't accept outdoor relief. He did not understand this, and therefore resented it. He was confused, for the interview had not taken the course which his illusions had led him to expect. There had been something pathetic, almost respectable, in his idea of Constance's fall from virtue. He had seen in the little girl a possible link between them, and had looked forward to his own broad-minded act of kindness, to an enduring connection which should be faintly flavored by a natural gratitude on her side, a tolerant comprehension upon his. But it was all very different from this. She did not want him. It was she, after all, who usurped the prerogative of virtue and cast him off. A disappointing woman. In this respect he had once thought her an exception to her sex. Nevertheless, as he went down the long flight of stairs, he said to himself, I'm damned if I don't send that poor little kid a jolly Christmas present, all the same. As for Constance, once he had gone, her high courage left her quickly. It was one thing to burn your boats when they have brought you to the invasion of a desirable country, another to destroy them when they have cast you upon the arid shores of no man's land. She had obeyed orders blindly. No more came. In this ghastly moment, when she knew herself solitary in the world, cut off by her own honesty from her kind, the cup gave to her no comfortable light. She sat huddled before it, before the closed doors of the shrine, in the empty and hideous room. She hated that triumphant chalice which had brought her to this miserable pass, hated it, as children hate in their gusty wrath the masters whom they are impelled to obey. The watcher within whispered words of affection and grief. But he was a spiritual thing. She could not touch him. It is only at the end of our education that we can learn to find our comfort in a voice. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of A Column of Dust by Evelyn Underhill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Recording by Josh Mitteldorf. Chapter 20. How Constance Kept Christmas. Êtes-vous couvert de blessures mortelles, que l'amour vous embrasse, et vous voilà sauvé? Be you covered with mortal wounds. Love will kiss you, and you will be saved. On Christmas Eve, Constance returned late from the bookshop to find Mrs. Reed sitting before the fire with Vera, rolled in blankets, in her arms. Helen said, I came in after supper to see whether you would want me at the shop tomorrow morning. Mr. Lambton had not decided when I left. The child was awake, I heard her crying, so I could not help going in to see whether there was anything I could do. Sometimes, a little drink of water will send them off to sleep. But she seemed so restless that at last I got her up and stayed a little while to comfort her. Constance unpinned her hat, took off the cheap fur and ready-made coat of grey tweed, went to the mirror and patted her hair into place. 10:30, she said. What a day! I'm sorry you have to wait so long. No, we need not go tomorrow. All the arrears are cleared off at last. I've been doing up parcels ever since we closed. You're free till Monday now. Let me take Vera back to bed. You must be tired out. She's far too heavy to nurse for more than a few minutes at a time. I don't think she's very well. Constance parted the blankets and looked at the child more carefully. Vera slept with her head sunk forward, her mouth open. Her face had an odd and waxen pallor. There were brownish shadows under her eyes. Every now and then she gasped for breath, and curious twitchings ran along her limbs. At once the watcher stirred eagerly and whispered, "The child is very sick. Perhaps she will die, and then you will be free to live." Helen said, "Let me keep the little thing for the present. I'm not overtired. She's sleeping now. She likes the warmth. If we move her, she may wake again." She replaced the blanket with infinite gentleness, brooding over her burden with that profound and impersonal love which comes naturally to those who have been disciplined in the service of the weak. She looked, in spite of her uncomfortable attitude, utterly contented and utterly at rest. Constance felt herself cast out from the magic ring which was made easily and naturally as Giotto's circle by the women's arms about the suffering child. She, the mother whose sublime opportunity was here, knelt at Helen's side, agitated and helpless, confused, and horrible emotions, hopes, fancies, fears, chased each other through her mind. "I'm glad that I came tonight," said Helen. "It's so terrible to be alone when anything one loves is ill. You will let me stay now, won't you? You may want some help later on." Oh, I can't do that. It may mean sitting up all night with her, and you've had a hard day. You need rest," Helen answered. "Rest? Why, I have had nothing real to do since October, and I like it. I like to feel that I am useful. It takes the loneliness away. I can do something, perhaps, to ease the child a little. You see, I'm used to nursing. I shall know exactly what to do. They are much the same, old men and little children. Please let me stay. I'm so fond of little girls." Towards midnight Vera left her sleep and broke into bitter moanings. There was no longer any doubt as to the grave nature of her malady. As Christmas bells began, Constance made up the fire, set about the heating of blankets, the boiling of water, and entered upon a night of struggle and suspense. Helen had gone out in search of a doctor. She was alone with the three mighty forces which disputed dominion over her life. There was first the hidden cup. It reigned in its austere silence, sequestered from the troubled plain of human endeavor, surveying it. It gave her no help. Contrasted with the actual griefs, the harsh problems of life and death which she felt clamorous about her, it seemed unreal, an incredible thing. There was the child in her arms, appealing at this moment to all that she had of responsibility and protectiveness, of simple, natural love. There was the watcher in her mind, vividly conscious of an approaching crisis. He sought, it was clear, to govern her weakness, to save her from the worst consequences of ideals which he found quixotic, even insane. His attitude was marked by an affectionate vigilance. He was like a kindly guardian, determined on the social salvation of some young, bewildered creature, who is ready, in spite of prudent counsels, to sacrifice his happiness to some wild notion of honor or truth. All his supersensual powers of discernment concentrated now upon her service. He perceived in Vera the one tangible obstacle to that full and pleasant life which she desired and he would help her to attain. He saw her chance at hand, his chance to act for her, to straighten the tangle of her life, that incomprehensible past which militated, as it seemed, in this mad world against all pleasurable intercourse, could be shut down, annihilated by the friendly hand of death. The child was desperately ill. The watcher, for whom physical symptoms had no meaning, yet discerned unerringly the loosening of the ties which bound her little spirit to the dust. As a life, she was without value, ugly, evil, an abortive thing. He felt that it was reasonable, clearly implicit in the will, that the imperfect should be swept from this teeming world in order that the perfect might have air and food and space. The watcher was unaware of any reason why the principles of natural selection should be applied in the jungle, but neglected in the home. Eye to eye with him, Constance saw it too. Her freedom, the disappearance of many embarrassments, social and financial, of the dreary and difficult future from which there was no other escape. Then the emergence of new opportunities, a fresh lease of that life, those chances of free action which she loved. She saw the kaleidoscope abruptly shaken, and new and glittering pictures made, with this one bit of ugly glass eliminated from the scheme. Then she realized with horror the prospect which she had been contemplating so calmly, the prospect of her own child's death. She could not help but contemplate its possibility, for the watcher, with authority, held this picture perpetually before her mind. He said to her, "Why be disturbed? All is well. Death is acting in your interest. You do not love this child." "No," she replied. "No, I don't. But I want to. If only I could." "Then, since you do not love, where is your reason for clutching? Why keep and cherish that which you do not even need? In this you are more foolish than your fellow creatures. Surely it were best to let her go." "I cannot. You do not understand. Death is the one thing in which we may never acquiesce. We are bound to fight it, keep it at bay. Human life is sacred." "How absurd your illusions are," said the watcher. "Human life? What do you mean by life? The crawling dust? Is this sacred? If you mean the spirit which it imprisons, that cannot die. It can only emigrate." "And what is the difference between one side of the veil and the other? They are both in the idea." She answered, "Perhaps that may be true. I do not know. But I must go on, must keep her as long as I can. She is a bit of my life, my bit of life, given into my care. I've got to save her. I know it is unreasonable, but I must." "Even as a life, she is not worth saving. She is twisted, imperfect. She will never grow, never be beautiful, never transmit the idea." It was true. She knew it. "Where then," he said, "is the value of this distorted thing, of its little scamper through the dream?" "It must have a value somehow, somewhere. Each of us counts." "How convinced you are of your importance! Yet each one of you, at a touch, an incident, may crumble to the dust, and another soul will come, snatch your dust for its clothing, linger a little while, and then away. This is your destiny. So why not accelerate the process? Help the will. Imperfect, misbegotten things embarrass life, confuse it. Surely it were best to expel them from the dream." She answered, "Perhaps, but I can't have a hand in it. I must not interfere. I may bring forth, but I dare not undertake to destroy, to permit a destruction that I can by any possibility prevent, that is beyond my province and life's. We can only hand on." He disdained to answer her. His will, as she felt, was already active in this matter. Even whilst he disputed with her, he was pressing the child's spirit from existence, forcing it, as it were, into the shadowy dimension beyond the confines of the dream. It came to this: if she were passive, Vera would die. She had but to acquiesce, and the issue was already decided. If she would save her, it could only be at the sword's point, all her will, all her strength, infecting that little feeble body and fighting in it and for it against the oblique charity of her friend. She was appalled by the strength which he brought to bear on her defences. At his coming he had desired nothing but an extension of his own powers, an appeasement of his own curiosity. These she could meet on their own level, combat if she chose. Then, vaguely, he had shifted his centre of interest. Her comfort, her joy, had been objects at least of sympathy, if not of care. These he had discussed, desired, but could hardly influence. Now, suddenly, he saw action ahead of him. He intended a definite outcome of the situation in which they were placed, and she was face to face with the strength of an immortal spirit which has at last found something to serve and to love. He said to her incessantly, "Leave it to me. Let me have my way. Be passive, and I will direct your life. Let the child die. Let her be pressed from the dream. She impedes you. It is better that she should go. Then you will be free to make links with the other little creatures, to reconstruct existence as you choose. This also, in the light of the idea, is but foolishness. Nevertheless, since it is that which you have chosen, you shall have it. But you shall, be thorough, fulfill the essentials of your dream." She listened, bewildered. Vera moved, sobbed, whispered a little, "Tante, I'm very badly hurt in my inside." She turned to the child, seeking vainly and desperately to mitigate her pain. She wanted to do it and had to, and the human act of ministration at once drove the inhuman influence away. Vera's mouth was drawn down in the sad grimace of anguish. She whimpered feebly each time that she tried to breathe. Her knees were drawn up under her flannelette nightgown, making queer angles beneath its shabby folds. It was disease in its most macabre, least lovely aspect, violently intrusive, deliberately grotesque. There was nothing poetic, nothing to relieve the ugliness of this ill-staged encounter with death. But Constance perceived no squalor in the picture. She was concentrated upon the duel which she was so suddenly compelled to fight. She forgot the intense fatigue of a body which had been employed in arduous labour for many hours now, forgot the hesitations and confusions of a spirit which was called to save at all costs, the one impediment to its own liberty and ease. She was there, confronted by a human need, and she met it. Strength arose in her, she knew not whence, to fight for this dreadful little life. As she worked, the inward voice spoke words of encouragement. She hardly heard them, as soldiers in the ecstasy of battle are unconscious of the commands which they obey. But in the midst of her labours, the wringing out of fomentations, the arranging of pillows to keep the weight of blankets from Vera's tortured little frame, she became aware presently of a change in the room, in the air of it. These determined acts of menial service had, as it seemed, introduced her automatically to a new dimension, where she found her senses to be adjusted to the rhythm of a more extended life. On this suddenly revealed plane of being, all the old objects of her perception had their place, but they were no longer quite natural, quite earthly. The walls and furniture, the hasty litter of bath and kettle, towels, pillows, rugs, the fire which burned like an ardent vision in the unsubstantial grate, were thin, strange, and shadowy, yet the life which they decked seemed profoundly, amazingly real. As once before in the adventure of the tree, she had penetrated appearance, and stood suddenly surrounded by truths. These truths, she observed, were sparsely distributed. They were 4 in number: herself and Vera, the Watcher and the Grail. These things hung, actual, in the abyss of being. They were at once veiled and supported by the webby matter of the dream, which shook and trembled incessantly about them. The misty earth, the papery houses, the shrine and the hearth, these were there only that they might demonstrate or conceal the thing which mattered, the choice which she must now make, the adjustment of her soul, her immortal reality, to the 3 companions who went with her on this way. Suddenly the will of the Watcher was upon her again fiercely. He put the thing before her with remorseless logic, saying, "Since appearance, movement, change, the life and death of the body are but illusion, why fight to avert the meaningless but inevitable sequence of things? Check this absurd impulse whilst yet there is time. Let be. Do not take sides, do not trouble. Can you not trust me to create for you a happy dream?" That terrible fatigue which is the mother of fatalism was creeping over her. She had done what she could. Vera dozed now among her pillows. Constance's hands were idle, her tired brain at the mercy of her friend. It would be a desperate business, as she saw this battle, a battle in which she must meet and conquer the insidious counsel as well as the assertive will. Where, she wondered, were the light and strength which the cup might have shed upon her in this crisis? What was in her heart which blinded her now to that pure radiance, shut her ears to the cry of that love? But she knew, even whilst she complained, cried, prayed for succour, the reason of her loneliness. This was her hour, and she must meet it alone. She had been flung, as it were, into the crucible. The fire and the water must do their work. Her will must stand free, unswayed, between good and evil, make its choice. The evil voice, disguised as friendship, cried in her ears. The divine voice was silent. It waited to pronounce judgment on the issue of the day. Yet she was not wholly solitary. She had at her hand an auxiliary, the strongest of auxiliaries, a weak thing for which she must fight. She and Vera stood together in this struggle. It was impossible to separate their interests. She saw it, saw them side by side, 2 human souls, poised amongst the powers of the air. She forgot the combat, forgot her own power of choice. Her whole consciousness, her whole will was merged in that of the child, which stood at the very boundary of life and death. This was a mother's business, the moment of encounter, perhaps for which that mother had been made. Constance, at this hour, forgot all else. She did not want heaven or earth, life or love. She was gone. She was not there. She ceased to count. The floods burst. Love, divine love, the selfless passion for imperfect things came upon her. She perceived herself to be greatly blessed in suffering, struggling for this, to give oneself for the unworthy. That, in this world of infinite gradation, was the only thing worth doing. Was it not the very pivot of creation, the secret of the Grail? Mysteriously she found herself initiated into its fraternity, sharing from far off in that ecstasy of pain. Measured by this standard, her wretched little sacrifice, her baby struggles, seemed contemptible, but its light fell on them, helped them, lent them its own splendour. It gave them, as it were, a consecration. This circumstance did not make her happy, did nothing to smooth the path that she must tread. She did not want that, asked for no personal reward. She was on the right side of this eternal battle. She knew it, and that was enough. She understood now why all knightliness, all honour, the pure quest of perfection, had ever centred in the Grail. She seized and adored and acknowledged it as the only thing that mattered. The folly, the quixotry, the humanity of the cross, its transcendent chivalry, its joy in anguish, shamed her. In her own quixotic fight with death, for the useless life which would but spoil her own, she drew near it, and there found her lost maternity, her selfless love. The sun rose, hard and frosty, upon Christmas Day. Its rays pierced red and level between the houses, and lit the chill streets where the lamps of the night offered to it the faint and evil opposition of artificial things. It shone into Constance's room, where there was no visible preparation for the honouring of the feast. The doctor had come and gone, leaving a verdict which obliterated all memory of times and seasons. Suspense was in the air. Vera's state was declared to be critical. The very forces of disease, it seemed, were on the side of the watcher. Works must be joined to faith if she were to be saved. Already the faint scent of drugs, the piteous makeshifts of a nursing which is conducted of necessity on the most frugal plan, had made their invasion. The place was littered with evidences of the battle of the night. Yet even here, in this unlikely corner, upon this shabby stage, the crib was set, the birth of love was honoured. The light of the cup shone now, white and ardent, on a lodging which had become a shrine, wherein under an image the essence of its worship was preserved. It was companioned by that antique symbol of incarnate divinity, a weary, selfless mother, wholly concentrated on the well-being of her child. But as she brooded over her daughter, tended her, Constance knew that she had but entered on the first phase of a relentless struggle. Something indeed she had conquered. Once for all she had dismantled the hard citadel of self. But the watcher was not defeated. He remained at large, very active. He did not submit to her decision. He combated it still, in the spirit of that civilization which exterminates savage tribes for their own good. He declared war, the war of the wisest, on his friend. In the cold street, a belated singer, dragging his way back toward the grateful paganism of home, hurled at the irresponsive houses the first stanza of a Christmas hymn. Christians awake, salute the happy morn, whereon the Saviour of the world was born. Rise to adore the mystery of love. Dear me, I did not know they understood it, said the watcher. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of The Column of Dust by Evelyn Underhill. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Josh Mitteldorf. Chapter 21. The Helpers of the Holy Souls. Intravi et vide qualcunque oculo anime mei, supra iundem oculum anime mei, supra mentem meam lucem Domini incommutabilem, qui novit veritatem novit eam, et qui novit eam novit eternitatem, caritas novit eam. I entered and beheld with the eye of my soul, such as it was, above the same eye of my soul, above my mind, the Lord's light unchangeable. Whoever knows the truth knows what that light is, and he that knows it knows eternity. Love knows it. From the Confessions of St. Augustine, Book 7. The new year was come. Vera's sickness had lasted for nearly 10 days, with fluctuations of hope, with sinkings and rallyings, as the silent battle for her life went on. Her mother's strength was poured out in this struggle, as if in the travail of a new and more terrible birth. The snowy weather had left them, and a dark fog brooded all day in the streets. It invaded the house, adding to the difficulties of the nurses and to the misery of the sick child, struggling for breath. Constance, whose weary mind was at the point in which any superstition seems more natural than reason itself, was almost prepared to see in this some new machination of the watcher, whose malignant love still sought to free her from the life-giving chains to which she clung. She was tired, sick at heart, desperately anxious. All that she cared for now was the saving of her child, living for her. Yet she doubted whether her vitality, though she gave it to the uttermost, would avail against the terrible strength of the watcher, who never tired, never wavered from his attack. She wanted to save that vitality, too, that she might devote it to Vera's service, to her education, her happiness, her career. Every atom of the child's body, every movement of her evil little mind, was precious to her. Both, she was determined, should reach such perfection as she was able to give. But life, whose resources, whose kindness she needed so greatly at this moment, seemed inclined to an increasing hardness, an enmity even. It was not for nothing, as she saw, that she had made her home into the sanctuary of the Grail. Upon her every aspect of existence it imposed its difficult interpretation, dominated the future no less than the present. The forces of the world were set angrily against it. It turned to them an implacable face, and demanded the same loyalty in its friends. It was a stern nurse. True to the tradition of chivalry, it inculcated the great and military virtues, valor as well as love, crying, "Cibus sum grandium cresce et manducabis me." I am the food, grow thee and eat me. She was reminded of a cathedral of old France, visited in the happy days of her ignorance. There, as she remembered, in a porch that was the very picture-book of faith, St. George and St. Martin stood sentinel on each side of the great entrance, as if to assure intending initiates of the ineffable that only by courage and charity could they attain to the mysteries within. As she sat in the foggy room by Vera's bedside, watching the clock for the moment at which temperature should be taken and medicine given, she reviewed the difficulties, the problems, the changes which had flowed from its custody. Her friends were gone, all but Helen, in whom disclosure of the truth had but awakened a deeper sympathy, an almost envious love which enfolded mother and child together in its embrace. Her work, she knew, would go. Mr. John had not as yet taken action in the matter, but Miss Tyrrel's frank and abrupt disclosure of her motherhood had shocked him. He could not decide upon the right way to take it. Her enforced absence during the child's illness had kept the matter in the foreground of his consciousness, and shown him, at the same time, the extent to which he relied upon her services. One may be sorry for Mr. John at this juncture. He disliked the sudden necessity for managing his own affairs, and naturally extended to its cause his general sensations of resentment. He wished very heartily that the subject had never been mentioned to him. Miss Tyrrel's behaviour had been tactless. He hated decisions, and this indiscreet and unnecessary confession had thrust on him a forced option of singular difficulty. She was an excellent manager and very cheap, but Mr. John knew that the sums which are saved in salaries are often paid for heavily in reputation, and Constance was left in little doubt as to the course which he would finally adopt. "With our large school and theological connection," he said, We are obliged to be so very particular." The watcher observed, You see, oh very foolish child, what is the use of being honest, of being true to the thing that you call life, when life itself is inimical, and the other creatures will not understand?" Loneliness and poverty then, she saw clearly for her future. She did not flinch before them, she only wished that she had greater strength for their encounter, that some limit might be set to the dreadful and growing fatigue which dimmed her energies and narrowed her outlook upon life. Small things also conspired to hurt her, to pull at her powers of endurance. Not least amongst them had been Andrew's intolerable kindness. He had heard from Mrs. Reed of Vera's sickness, and his persistent and extravagant gifts of invalid luxuries, which she dared not refuse, had at least made possible the child's ultimate recovery. That she should owe it to him, this longed-for and ruinous event, was an irony which she found very hard to bear. As she sat by the bed, therefore, she considered all these matters, and peering into the dimness ahead of her, wondered what would be the outcome of the fight. She looked to it with zest, whatever it might be, for now her old love of life had received a stimulus which it had never known before. She was bound to the earth, bound to the chariot of the years, by the blessed link of sacrifice. Vera needed her, would monopolize in the future her time, her strength, her love. She was very glad. About 2 o'clock Helen came in. She now replaced Constance at Lambton's for a few hours every day, and called at her lodgings at lunch-time to see whether anything was wanted for the child. She said, "You are looking very white and seedy to-day, Con. The strain is beginning to tell. Hadn't you better go out and get some air? The fog is so thick this afternoon that shopping is at a standstill, so I need not go back just yet. But it is not dangerous, and after all anything is better than a sick-room atmosphere when one is feeling overtired." Constance answered gratefully, "I should like to go for a little run, and there's a new prescription which must be made up this afternoon. She has the first dose at 5. I might take it as I go and then call for it later on and bring it in." She felt a sudden longing for space and silence, for some release from that inward struggle which was but exacerbated by the presence of the child. She put on her things quickly and fled on to the street, not trusting herself to look back at Vera's thin and wasted body, flat on the mattress, the cropped head which tried feebly to raise itself, the heavy eyes which followed her as she moved towards the door. The child broke into a wailing cry when she saw herself about to be forsaken. "Tante, don't go. I wants you. Wants a sugar pillow and a fairy tale of giants. Wants to be feted with a little silver spoon." Helen said, "Darling, I'll tell you tales and feed you. I will get you everything you want. Tante's going for a little walk, but I shall stay with you all this time." But Vera whimpered fretfully, "You isn't Tante. Wants her. Other people's is no good." Constance took with her that imperative cry, holding it tightly, savouring it, turning it in her mind. It warmed her towards existence, gave her new strength. She descended the stairs and went out into the roadway. The fog surged up before her, yellow and impenetrable. It wrapped all things in the soft folds of its mantle. At first she was blinded by it, but after a moment of careful staring she saw the high dim cliff of a house against the tawny sky, and then a spectral cab that went slowly past her. The man drove with one hand, and with the other slapped his chest, for a little wind blew from the east, and it was bitter cold. She walked a few steps toward a radiant haze which shone very softly in the distance. Presently she discovered it to be the fish shop at the corner, which was lit with a bluish splendour by its great electric lamps. It seemed full of jewelled things, mackerel, like little peacocks of the sea, glittering upon the slab, and the triumphant rose colour of the mullet, and many little elfish silver creatures which caught and threw back the lovely broken light. The mysterious beauty of the world, all the strange shapes of it, the incredible exquisite detail, ever apt to break on one's vision from such a corner as this, seized her and aroused in her a sudden agony of love. She perceived in herself a new and abnormal sensitiveness to this divine play of light and colour, a wild desire to hold it tightly, a wild strange fear lest it should be snatched away from her. But it could not be snatched away. This, at any rate, was hers. None could deprive her of it. The body and the heart might go hungry, but the eye could never be starved. How she loved the world! The adorableness of it, its intimacy, came home to her after 10 days of concentration on the battle with disease. Its dust and hers were of the same company. In loving it, she loved her own people, her nearest kin. Then she remembered that after all she was but the foster sister of the pretty things she worshipped. She had been put to nurse, as it were, amongst them, but sometimes she would shed her dust and go away. The thought of death smote her with a sharp pain, and left behind it a sickening sense of fear. Her life, even in the greyest days, had possessed that quality of organic completeness which prevents the idea of one's own death from being more than a polite assent to a proposition which is universally received. Now, she knew not why, she thought of it as an actual personal process, a strange circumstance, for in spite of hardship ahead of her, her zest for life had never been greater than at this hour. The watcher seized on this horrid thought, and forced it again and again upon her mind, saying to her, "Sometimes in the battle it happens that foolhardy warriors are killed. Then they must forsake this lovely world and all the excitements of the dream." He did not frighten her. It was so obviously implicit in the very scheme of things that she should live. She came to the cash chemist's, gave in her prescription, and then turned to continue her walk. But the fog had thickened. It closed about her, brown and heavy. The effort that she made, the driving of her weary limbs in quest of air, seemed but a foolish travail, when this was all the air to be obtained. She hesitated. She might wait in the shop for the preparation of her medicine, and then go home. But the atmosphere of drugs, the odd and aromatic smells, were at the moment hardly her taste. In spite of smarting eyes and difficult breath, she walked a little way vaguely. Then a thicker wave of fog settled upon the streets, and she decided that it were better to turn backwards after all. The possibility of losing her way had suddenly occurred to her, and the awful consequences for the sick child who waited for the medicines at home. She turned, as she supposed, completely round, began with assurance to retrace her steps, but in a moment her foot felt the curb. She came with a jolt into the gutter-way, and was on the roughly macadamized surface of the road, possessed by the absurd but fear-inducing sense of being irretrievably lost. The soft silence of the fog was all about her, and converted the narrow street into a limitless desert. She walked on. All her idea of direction had vanished, and it was only after a period which seemed very long that she felt another curbstone rising against her foot, and was upon the pavement again. She edged from the roadway slowly, carefully, till she came with sensations of shock on the wall of a house. When she had crept by it for a little way, an edgeless and colourless figure appeared in the midst. Another woman, who also, it seemed, was hugging the friendly wall. They proceeded side by side for a short time, and presently the wall was broken by a door. The woman stopped there, rang a bell, and said to Constance, "There will not be many here to-day." Perhaps because Miss Tyrrel did not answer her, she added, "We are not really very late." The door opened a little way of itself and stood ajar. The lady pushed it wide open, entered, and held it that her companion might pass. Because she was lost and very tired, because of the thickness of the fog and her longing for some place of refuge where she might at least be still, Constance went in. She was blinded and stifled, wanted breathing space. The other woman preceded her, and she followed up a flight of stairs and then through another door. Behind it she found, as she had vaguely expected, a small and perfumed chapel. The fog shrouding the electric lamps filled it with a hazy golden light. Upon the simple altar were 12 candles, 12 misty flames like globes of dim fire. A few ladies knelt at the chairs in the centre aisle. No priest was present, but in the plain choir stalls which lined the little nave there were perhaps a dozen women. They looked somewhat like Quakeresses of the old school, before chocolate brought smartness in its train, somewhat like respectable French women of the bourgeoisie, brought from the recesses of a somnolent provincial town. They wore black woolen dresses, with little capes fastened upon the breast, and large old-fashioned bonnets which covered the hair and were tied beneath the chin, surrounding the face with an upstanding black ruche. Incurably humble and demure she judged them, full of kindness, but without initiative. As she seated herself upon a chair near the door, one of these quaint and gentle persons, evidently prosecuting some ritual already begun, cried in a thin, pure voice, with a wailing cadence hardly of this world, "Ei mihi Domine," and the other voices responded in their far-off accents of a selfless and delicate lamentation, which, even in its grief, still remembered the language of hope. Ad Dominum cum tribulader clamavi, et exudivit me. When I was in trouble, I called upon the Lord, and he heard me. What a strange statement, made with an air of utter conviction by these sequestered and unearthly women, living unsuspected behind walls which fringed a busy London street. Were they, she wondered, speaking for themselves? And what was the intention of the ceremony on which she had chanced? At the ending of the psalm, the note changed. The high, clear voice which had chanted the antiphon cried suddenly and fervently, "Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine," and its companion voices answered, "Et lux perpetua luceat eis." Then another psalm, and another, and always at the end of each that same bitter and imploring cry. She began to understand it. She had come upon one of those places, scattered through Christendom, where the ritual of the dead is ceaselessly performed. The Church, by these delegates of hers, was doing what she could do for these immigrant sons and daughters who had gone out into a new world. She was afraid for them, knowing that they shared her imperfection. She yearned toward them, pitiful, longing to help them if she could. Requiem aeternam dona eis. A whole generation of mourners joined, as it seemed, in this impassioned prayer. Give them rest. They shall have it. We, the living, will work for it. Rest and light, more light. We have lit these little candles to mitigate their dimness, if we can. All the things which we have not ourselves can never get, never enjoy. These we ask for them. Our own deprivation we can endure, but help the poor dead, the lonely dead. Give them the calm illumination which we long for and always miss. We cry in their name, for we are one with them. Soon we shall be with them. They are here too. They implore us as we speak. We send our hearts before us, and our ineffectual wills over the brink which we too shall presently pass. We rush ahead of our experience, unite ourselves to those already there. We ask nothing for ourselves. We only assert our right to ask for them, to use our bodies for the bodiless, our voices for the silent, our tears for those who cannot even weep. Behind the veil of misty light, Constance seemed to divine them, the poor and helpless dead, waiting so anxiously upon the supplications of their friends. In the fog, where bodies became as phantoms and every standard of reality was at fault, it was easy to believe in them, to feel all about one, caught perhaps in the fog of personality, the mighty wistful company of souls, called by the familiar rites to lean out from their country into this. She discerned their very gentle prayer for help. She too was impelled to ask for them light and a clear horizon, a release from the strained ears, the strained eyes, from the ignorance and helplessness which constitute the condition of the lost. Then she thought of the sick child at home, hovering itself upon the edge of this multitude. Should Vera die, could she ask these things for that elfish, cruel creature, that little heap of appetites and habits which her own starved appetites had brought to birth? What was Vera, once her active little body had been cast away? An incompleted thing, for whom the lesson of the flesh remained unlearned. In this quiet chapel, where the chanting of psalms had now given place to soft recited prayers, Constance regained the clear vision which had forsaken her during the preceding busy days. From this spiritual place she looked temperately out upon life. She saw her battles with the Watcher tending to its crisis. Because something of the atmosphere of infinity was caught between those walls, he had gained in strength. He rose and dominated her. She felt her own increasing weakness, saw that he was her master, and trembled for the little child whom she would save. There could be, it was clear, no amicable termination of this contest, no final living side by side, all three of them, she, Vera, and the subjugated lodger within. He would not tolerate that. And then she saw something else, a new and terrible solution which had not occurred to her before. The Watcher must be expelled from the dream, compelled to relinquish his hold on material things. This was the one way to be rid of his influence, the sole solution by which Vera's safety was assured. If he stayed, he would have his will of the child, push her remorselessly from life. His hatred of her intrusive personality was the complement of that blind and narrow love which he lavished on his friend. Her mother's strength could not avail against him, but that mother might yet win a more splendid victory if she would. She might go and drag him with her from the field. So tightly was he enmeshed within her being that only thus could he depart. She saw it now in this place of light. Her very soul and body must be torn asunder if she would extricate him from the fetters of the dust. There was no longer room in life for her and Vera. One or the other of them must perish. This cruel truth grew and filled her consciousness. Gradually all other truths, hopes, plans, melted before it, leaving it in possession of her mind. But she did not want to die. She wished, she longed to live for her daughter's sake, to offer, if she might, reparation for the coldness of past years. She had schemed it all, her care, her tenderness, her courage, begun already to taste its joy. She was going to concentrate herself on Vera, Vera who, without her guardianship, was helpless, a nameless child cast upon the world. Could such an act of abandonment as this deliberate death be called her duty? Could this be the solution towards which she was being pressed? She exclaimed within her mind, "I cannot bear it! What a choice! To forsake her, or else to let her die? Where could she go? Who would take her? How cruel, how inexorable they are!" "You see," said the Watcher, "you see your sacrifice would be a useless one, and even if it were not, Would you indeed give your very life for this? Go from life in order that she may live in poverty and imperfection, move to and fro, add to the ugliness of things? How gross a folly! You who love it all so much, to go for ever from the dream? She answered him meekly, pleading with him, for now he had her at his mercy, and she was not ashamed to sue him for her life. You see, she said, the pass to which you have brought me. Is this love? Will you not have patience yet a little? Wait, give me time. Do not kill me. Do not force me in this action. I do not want to go. He answered, I will not wait, for I see the future. I see that, since you will not yield, it is best that you should die. If you live, there cannot be a happy outcome, only eternal effort and wasted sacrifice. That too may make one happy, she said. You do not understand. I do not understand your wild illusions. They weary me. I want to go away. I can no longer bear this squalid corner, these perverse sufferings and unworthy loves. To love the cup and the reality behind it, that were comprehensible. It is indeed your destiny, your only joy. But to this, it seems, you hardly can attain. Therefore, if you would live, let go, that I may extricate you from your ugly tangles. Then we will wander freely through the dream and look for beauty, happiness, and life. She steeled herself against him, and he, sadly conscious of the alienation of his friend, said, Ah, let me go. I loved you, and I longed to help you, but I cannot make you happy, because you resist. Therefore you must die and release me, for I am very weary of this confused and hopeless world. There had been an interval of silence in the chapel when the Vespers of the Dead came to an end. Suddenly it was broken, as it appeared, by a litany of some kind. Constance was still deep in the fear and amazement which her discovery had induced, hoarding, as it were, her courage for the awful hour which she discerned ahead. Hence the opening phrases went past her very softly, without attaining to her consciousness. But presently she woke from her dream, called forth by the high and urgent voice which led these poignant ceremonies. She heard it cry with a strange accent of authority, a certainty that its invocation could not be in vain. All ye orders of blessed spirits, and the congregation took it up, finishing the phrase, pray for the faithful departed. They had gone, it seemed, beyond the limit of their first petition. The supplication of divine omnipotence was over. Now they extended their appeal, humanized it, claimed the help of the triumphant dead in caring for their poorer kin. Saint Gregory, Saint Augustine, Saint Ignatius, cried the appellant voice, and the eager chorus followed with its supreme demand, pray for the faithful departed. None were excused from this duty. One after another the torch-bearers of the faith were claimed, petitioned, and with so assured an accent that Constance almost expected a quiet presence to answer from behind the radiant mist. It went on, that roll call of the happy dead, and with each name the reiterated imperative, united cry for help. They called them down into this little chapel, claimed their kinship, insistent on the necessity of their suffrages, expectant of their brotherly aid. They were reminded of their humanity, these elect and shining spirits, snatched from the study, the brothel, the battlefield, the court. You, these intent and amazing women seemed to say, you, even more than we, should work, should plead for them. You have achieved, you have entered the light, you are there. We do our best, but we are so far away. We lack your transcendent opportunity. Therefore we remind you of your fraternal obligations, all ye holy doctors, popes, and confessors. Pray for the faithfully departed. The woman who knelt alone, struggling with her terror and astonishment, trying so hard to acquiesce in the sacrifice which she must make, was inexplicably consoled by this intimate colloquy, this assurance of the reality, the friendliness of the populations who awaited her beyond the veil. It was but another aspect of that world of the dead which the watcher had divined amongst the Westmoreland hills, whose friendship she had pressed on her then. How peaceful, she thought, was the lot of this army, resting thus in the ever-renewed memory of the race. Here, the fretting duties of the dust accomplished, was perfect unity, the social link, the unhindered love. It seemed as though death alone could convey the fullness of life. Constance felt herself to be initiated into a mighty society, held, welcomed, and sheltered by it. Her terror passed away. She turned on the watcher. "You," she said to him, "have nothing to do with this. I am not afraid now. All is well. I see that it does not matter where one is in it, living or dead, this side or the other of the veil. You said that to me once. I give it to you again. But Vera must stay, because she has not finished, is not ready to go out of the dream." He was astonished, a little crestfallen. "Do you mean," he said, "that you are glad to go, as Martin was, you who cannot see the light?" She answered, "Yes, I believe I am. Glad to make a good departure, a death that is worth while. They shan't be ashamed of me if I can help it, the people on the other side." She was very tired now. She could dispute with him no longer. She only wished to sleep. The litany continued, and she listened to it idly, till suddenly, from out its rhythmic supplication came one, startling in its supreme assurance, which obliterated the walls of the chapel, the very ramparts of the world, and set about those who could make it the splendours of a house not built with hands, that thou wouldst be pleased to admit them to the contemplation of thy adorable beauty. We beseech thee to hear us. These captives of time and space, from the very deeps of their prison, offered this selfless prayer for those who had passed from their sight. She rose on the wings of it, she for whom that prison door stood open. She asked it for herself, and for the watcher, for all the spirits of the living and the dead. This was what she wanted, what all men wanted. This was the link still lacking to unify the scattered actions of her life. But one must, as she saw it, share in that beauty, contribute to it, as the one condition of true sight. Did the watcher, she wondered, see it? Had he done so? It had surely purified his love, satisfied his thirst for reality, stilled his unrest. Others had the vision in some measure. It was here in the world for those who had learned to see. She remembered Martin, remembered the sacred thing to which she had given an unwilling guardianship, remembered Helen, sanctified by a foolish agony which she did not understand. Then, turning on herself, she asked suddenly, passionately, the one question of the awakened soul: "How can I serve it? What can I give?" The inner inhabitant was ready to reply to her, but she knew the only answer before she heard its voice. As she went out from the chapel, hushed, shaken, and bewildered, there stood by its entrance one of the demure and black-gowned sisters of the choir. She looked at Miss Tyrrel with friendliness, as if divining in her some quality appropriate to the rites. Constance said, "What is this place? Who are you?" The woman answered in the sweet and nervous accents of the cloister, "Madam, we are called the helpers of the holy souls." End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of The Column of Dust by Evelyn Underhill. Recording by Josh Mitteldorf. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22. How They Went Home. And at the end of woe, suddenly our eyes shall be opened, and in clearness of light our sight shall be full. Julian of Norwich, Revelations of Divine Love. It did not surprise either Helen, the doctor, or the landlady that Constance's illness should follow so close upon the convalescence of the child. She had not spared herself. Her devotion had even verged upon foolishness, including as it did an indulgence of the patient's caprices, an attention to her mere happiness which no student of modern therapeutics could approve. During these last permitted days of her physical existence, she was ceaselessly obsessed by the desolating consciousness of awakened spirit that she could never, under any circumstances, love enough. In the life to which she went, as she conceived of it, love would be effortless, a joy. It would spring, and she with it, to its source. In the life which she must leave, it had been a high and splendid duty, difficult, full of enticements for the courageous soul, but she had neglected that transcendent opportunity, been blind to its romance, and her act of reparation did nothing to assuage her remorse. Hence she devoted herself feverishly, whilst she could, to the satisfaction of Vera's smallest fancies, waiting on her, playing with her, never absent from her room. For this she relinquished, as she knew, her final chances of communion with the adorable world from which she went. It meant something to an impassioned lover of beauty to forego her last opportunity of seeing the spare trees in their dress of hoar-frost, the misty glory of the river when the light begins to fade, the miracle of Oxford Street at the moment in which its lamps flash splendid in the dusk. These familiar and exquisite sights, always friendly to her weary eyes, were going. Her very eyes were going, all her senses, time and dimension, shape and colour, sound and space. There were moments when she could not bear it, when she cried out in agony against her fate. To die in furnished lodgings is not pleasant, even to the amateur of death. Her regrets were made the more tormenting by the fact that she here suffered, in their extremest form, all those squalors and discomforts which are incident to our departure from the dust. The watcher, in the midst of his own eagerness to be gone, was very sorry for his friend. He anticipated for her no happy future. Her spiritual blindness, as he saw it, would be as great a drawback to the enjoyment of eternity as his own supersensual prejudices had been to the comprehension of time. She would exist, as he knew, in the real, for ever and ever. What could she do there, this creature who had not even been able to contrive her own comfort in the dream? To know, this for him was still the great matter. He perceived in Constance a deep ignorance of the conditions on which she must be cast. He would yet have offered her a place for repentance had she desired it, for now he was almost soft-hearted where this one woman was concerned. But she was intent on his departure, and even in the darkest hours she did not flinch. She struggled to expel him from her spirit, longing to be herself, to be at peace, to regain the sole possession of her senses before she laid them finally away. He, too, fought with her against the clinging fetters of the flesh, eager for home, anxious to be gone from a lodging where he did not any longer feel at ease. The battle tore at her body, racked it with a fever which no medicines could still. She lay hour after hour alone in the dreary room. She gazed vacantly at the faded pictures, counted the drab daisies upon the slate-coloured wall. Time was marked only by the perfunctory visits of the landlady, who looked in to bring useless and unpalatable nourishment, and see whether there was anything required. Once every day Vera came to her, and this was the moment towards which she lived. When Constance sickened, Mrs. Reed had removed the child to her own lodging, delighted to have again the whole custody of a living thing that she could tend. She had said to Miss Tyrrel during the first days of her illness, "You must not worry about Vera whilst you are laid up. She is quite safe with me, and I am so pleased to be able to take care of her. I don't know when I have enjoyed anything so much. It makes such a difference, beginning the day by dressing her and ending it with putting her to bed, having her little clothes to mend and her feeding to consider. You cannot think what that all means when one has been living alone with nothing to arrange for but oneself." "Would you like it always?" "Always," answered Helen. "Sometimes I feel that I must keep her, must have something to serve. I cannot bear to think about the moment when I shall have to let you have her back again." "Perhaps that moment will not come." Helen looked at her nervously. "Oh, no, no!" she said. "You are quite mistaken. You're very weak just now, and it makes you depressed. But the doctor said today that he is sure there are no complications. As soon as your temperature drops, you will have nothing to do but get well. And if I don't—" "Then, then, I hope she would be mine," said Mrs. Reed. Fear and excitement strove together in her voice. "And, of course, it won't happen. It is absurd to think of it. But if it ever did, I should do my best for her, my very best, and I wouldn't steal her from you. I should always remember that she was really yours. She should never be allowed to forget you. I promise that." It was a promise which carried little conviction. Helen spoiled the little girl, who already began to turn to her, pleased by her new and undisciplined life, and resenting with her customary violence the quietness and restraint which were imposed during her morning visits to Constance's room. Vera had the animal's instinctive hatred of the sick, and could hardly be persuaded to submit to her mother's feeble embrace. That mother, therefore, saw herself in the act of withdrawing from a world which did not seem to need her any more. She was going very quickly, helped thereto by the watcher, who wished that her earthly pain at least might end. She had cast him from her mind. He no longer governed her vision, but he could not leave her because he loved. Mrs. Reed had looked in at lunch-time and found her sleeping. She thought the omen a good one, and crept quietly away, for the day was fine, and she wished to take Vera for a little walk. She arranged the bedside table, placing milk and medicine within reach, and warned the landlady that Miss Tyrrel was best left undisturbed unless she rang her bell. When Constance awoke, the afternoon was waning, and her room was grey and dim, being filled with a wintry twilight, which made this place of departure seem one already with the colourless dimension of the dead. She looked about her, rather puzzled. The place seemed strange. It was so very large and shadowy, and she so small, smaller than her body, she thought. In some subtle way she was changed. Yet she could not capture, analyze her new condition. Things were becoming queer, very queer indeed. She did not put it any more definitely than that. She was not frightened, but she was annoyed to discover that her mind was too weak to grasp the strange experience to which, plainly, she had come, the last of her adventures, perhaps. Opposite to her bed was the little cupboard in which she had locked the shrine of the cup. She wished that she could reach it, unlock the door, and look within. Somehow, she fancied, that might explain things, give her something to rest upon, something that would not display the confusing qualities which now invested all visible objects of thought. She stared at the cupboard very hard. Presently she found herself going towards it quite easily, then, as if she were looking through some glassy substance, and in the very act of looking penetrated that on which she gazed, she found herself in the presence of the Grail. She had forgotten everything else, was not strong enough to attend to her body any longer. The teasing question of life and death, of the conditions of the transit, passed away. She did not think of asking herself on which side of that veil she existed, because the veil had disappeared. She and the chalice faced one another, but not the cup of cloudy glass which she had known. It had taken on the splendours of reality, and she smiled, for she looked perfection in the face. It shone close to her, yet unseizable. It shone through the whole world, a lens which focused and poured out upon the piteous sphere of effort the benediction of the uncreated light, humble yet omnipotent, desirous and elusive. She wondered whence she had obtained those words. They came back to her now, suddenly comprehended. They were all that remained within her mind. Her eyes were opened on eternity, easily, naturally, since they were shut forever on the illusions of the earth. She perceived reality at her door, ever near her, patient and unsleeping, awaiting the recognition of its child. She saw it, but not alone. Even in the act of departure she must, it seemed, carry out the redemptive duties of her race, as Dante, gazing into the eyes of Beatrice, there saw reflected the light of divine. So the watcher, gazing into the soul of his friend at this crucial moment of transcendent victory and earthly loss, was permitted to see the transfigured spirit, the inmost inhabitant, where it sat like a Mater Dolorosa, holding upon its knees the slain self by whose death it was redeemed. It seemed to him now a very holy thing, and full of wonder. He did not know that its sacrifice was commonplace enough. There was no one to tell him that, judged by the stupendous standards of humanity, any other action had been a sin, that Constance's passion took no heroic rank amongst the sublime adventures of the dust. In the human aspect of her death, in its determined quixotry, its profound and unrewarded love, he recognized, astonished, the key to all the mazes of the dream. Out of this agony there was reflected for him a ray of that divine personality which he, the ignorant and impersonal investigator of things, had little suspected to be the energizing light in which alone it was possible to see God. In that light, eternity was remade for him. The awful boredom of the infinite, its incomprehensibility, had passed away. He no longer noticed that he did not understand, for the desire to know was gone. He looked again, detached from the dream, on the busy tangle of organic things, on a world founded on illusions, supported by the considerations of matter, growth, and sex. But now he saw no paradox, no confusion, only as it were a furnace whence, now and then, the will drew forth a perfect spirit, made for its own delight. He heard now the voice of that love in which all subsists, crying through eternity with a sad voice and urgent to its many errant sons. And the most faithful of all answers to this appeal did not come from the infinity which is its home, but was dragged and distilled from the turmoil of life, from the midst of that sacrificial torment which he had so bitterly and ignorantly regretted for her whom he had learnt to call his friend. There, in the healing of division, he saw perfect union attained. He who had now all knowledge saw himself outstripped by those who had a very little love, and saw also in the satisfaction of his own lust of curiosity an end which even the meanest human soul had hardly held consistently through life. But he had loved her a little, he had followed her faithfully, he had done for her his mistaken best. Now he abased himself before her, before the spirit of a tired and broken outcast, whom even earth had held to be impure. Her poor and weary body had fallen asleep, and from between the lips of it her soul came out as gladly as a little bird from its cage. It was the soul which he had watched and loved as it struggled to burn in the difficult air of the earth, but had hindered because he never understood. Now it shone very brightly without flickering, having sloughed off the tedious apparatus of the flesh. It shot up, a penetrating flame of love, straight to that heart of being, which all creation eternally desires. And he, who had torn so violently from out its prison the white soul of her whose life he dared to judge, took with it his last lesson and his release. He was initiated into heaven, and stood there beside her, humbled, glorified, redeemed by that humanity into whose august secrets he had tried to look. The dream was over. It faded before the splendors of the real. He rose from his sleep, wide-eyed to see the sacred spirit of man brought forth from a column of dust. End of chapter 22. End of The Column of Dust by Evelyn Underhill.